Hi guys. I'm gonna wait for a couple people to pop in here. I just need to make sure my camera's straight. And I'm gonna wait for Jon to join us. He's gonna be our artist that we're talking to today. So as soon as he pops in, there he is. We're gonna add him and we'll get to talking. Hi.
Hello.
Hi again. We're just. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. Okay. So, all right, let me just do a quick intro. So I'm Christine. I am the general manager at Sorel. I'm here in my home office. If you've watched any of our live interviews before, you've probably seen me. And we are talking today to Jon. My first question is going to be to ask Jon to say his first and last name in particular, pronounce it, because I actually don't. I feel like when I say it, I'm like saying the U, and I don't know if I should.
Puzzuoli.
Puzzuoli.
Yeah.
Okay, so you don't really say you don't see the second U.
I say it the American way.
Okay, all right, good. So we're talking to Jon Puzzuoli. He is one of our very talented sculptors, and we're gonna just talk to him about process, inspiration, all the fun stuff. And he has a couple of really beautiful new pieces in our collection at Sorel too. So we'll get into a little bit of we'll kind of touch on that. So first off, and the other thing I wanted to say is that if anybody, number one, if you have any questions for Jon, pop them in the comments and I'll do my best to ask them throughout the time we're talking. And number two is if you can't catch the whole thing, that's okay. We're going to have a written interview that's going to go on our blog. And we are also going to have, this video will be available to watch in full after I will post it. So, okay, let's start with, where are you from originally? Where are you located working now?
So I was born in Stamford, Connecticut, 8 miles away from where I currently live in Norwalk, Connecticut. So I didn't move far.
Okay, not bad, not bad. So your studio's in Norwalk.
Yeah.
Okay. So how did you get started as an artist and with your current medium, if that changed at any point? I don't know if it did, but.
From a very small child, I always remember wanting to work with my hands and being gifted for Christmas art supplies. So I think it's in my genes from an early age, or it could just be that I was given art supplies at Christmas from my family.
Nature or nurture? It's a good question.
But I think that my family probably realized that when my hands are active and my mind is busy, I'm a lot more calm and at peace. And I would have been an artist of some sort. And I did a lot of photography before clay. But clay really scratches that itch of keeping my mind busier than any other medium that I've tried before. And ever since I touched it for my first semester in pottery, I've just fell in love with it.
That's cool.
I took a couple of private lessons with an art teacher in high school who was kind enough to stay after school and give me some, I think there were like 3 or 4 private lessons.
Nice. And that lit the spark a little bit for you. So in terms of your creative process, now that, like I mentioned to you already earlier that I have a painting background. So in terms of process, I have always found the sort of clay kiln, the whole thing to be like that process to be very complicated. So I'm wondering if you can just break down step by step what the sort of, maybe it's the standard, but maybe you do it in a unique way. So whatever your way of your creative process goes from start to finish, just give us a little bit of an idea of how that looks.
I feel like my strong suit is my glazing and my colors and the feeling that my pieces give off. So oftentimes I try to, before I even start a project, to think about the glazes that I am going to use. And I think of my glazes like friends. Every friend has a personality and a time and a place to call on to do a specific mood or task. And glazes really need certain forms to, whether they're vertical or horizontal or somewhere in between, to really thrive and look as amazing as they can. So each one has a strong suit, and you need to know going into the process the team that you're going to have play for you and start there. And then I build the forms and the mood around the piece, because pottery is a really complicated and very labor intensive, and you have to be patient because there's a lot of steps.
Thank you. I think it's complicated and labor intensive too.
Well, there's a lot of connecting the dots beforehand that you need to do rather than painting it. It's the timeline, to me at least, seems very straightforward, that it goes from point A to whatever point you end at. But with pottery, you need to really start with the end product and work your way back to the start point, because otherwise your piece doesn't really look cohesive. If you're changing your plan going straight forward, then what you want to do on point B doesn't really mesh with point A.
Yeah.
Really, the ideas don't drive together.
Yeah.
So thinking about it as a cohesive project, and then keeping that thought in your head, and remembering that as you go along the process, that, oh, this was my starting intent. Because you can really see on a pot, if you started off with a cool idea, and then like you can see the idea change, whether an application of glaze or a rim treatment or something, and they all look really cool individually, but cohesively on the piece, they don't mesh or give really the mood that the artist might have wanted. So it's realizing what you want at the beginning that I feel is a lot of my process.
Yeah. And when you say glaze, you're talking about what you put over top of the form. Is that right?
So the form, like this piece that I have going on the wheel here, that's freshly made. So the clay is still very moist. I still have to add handles to it, put texture on it, then it needs to dry for a couple days, and then it'll go into initial firing called a bisque firing, and that'll heat the pot up to 2,000 degrees, and that'll transform the clay from clay to ceramic. So there's a chemical change that happens in the clay that if it got wet, it'll never turn back into raw clay. So it's a stronger, the chemical water in the clay has come off of the clay and it's transformed into a whole new material.
Right.
And at that point, the glaze would get applied, and then it would go back into the kiln. And you're literally, with the glaze, you're melting a layer of glass on top of the layer of ceramic.
Okay. I have a very quick question. Can you please clarify for me difference between porcelain and ceramic?
So porcelain is a specific type of ceramic clay.
Oh.
So there's just a whole lot of different kinds of clay, depending on where they're mined. There's different elements in the clay. So clay is eroded rock, and it gets deposited often next to lakes or rivers. And there's different geology in different areas of the world, and they'll be deposited different elements and minerals along the way. So like in Connecticut, if you went into the forest, or if you have clay in your backyard and you dug it up, it would probably have a lot of iron oxide in it. So it'd be like a terracotta that we could dig up in this area. And that clay would get fired to a lower temperature than porcelain gets fired to. So each clay has a different chemistry to it, and each clay also has an application. And porcelain can get fired to a very hot temperature. The porcelain gets fired to 2,350 degrees, and it turns into a glass-like material. And if made thin enough, it can be translucent.
Okay. Wow. Now, have you ever dug up clay in your backyard in Connecticut and made anything out of it?
I have. One of my friends in Ashford, Connecticut, he digs up clay, and I joined him one day, and we did dig up some clay, and I made some really cute miniature pots, and
Ah.
I they looked really cool, and I got a little cocky, and I started them off in the kiln at a low temperature, and I wanted to see at what point the clay started to melt a little bit. And I pushed it a little too far, and I put it into a normal porcelain firing, and it just turned into it just melted into a ooze puddle in the kiln.
Okay. Oh, but your first round went well.
Yeah, and then I killed them in the second round.
Okay. All right. Well, okay. But that's okay. Maybe someday you'll revisit that, but at least you experimented a little bit. You learned something, so that's okay. So what do you find, this is a two-part question. What do you find the most rewarding piece of being an artist, either in creating an individual piece or in general, and what do you find to be the most challenging? So two pieces. There's a light and a dark side to this question.
The light and the dark. I would say that the answer is probably going to be the same.
That's
Yeah,
cool.
the rewarding and the most challenging. So I'm head of ceramics at Silvermine in Silvermine Art Center in New Canaan, Connecticut, and there's no other joy than getting to know that I passed some passion and lit something in somebody else,
Mm-hmm.
and just to see the gratification in their eyes when I give them something that they made that I helped teach them how to make, that lights their fire, and it also lights my fire.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the most challenging is to, like, right now I'm firing like 120 people's work in the kiln, and that's challenging.
Yeah. So logistically, that's a little bit tricky. We've actually had several different comments. It looked like someone who it has been a student of yours or is a student of yours that said you are an excellent teacher. We had a couple of people already say that you're teaching all of us very well today. So that's I think your fire is lighting everybody's fire here. So where do you look for? I guess your students would be one sound the way it sounds. Where do you look for inspiration, or where do you find inspiration, I guess, is another, because it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going out looking for it every day, but where is it for you?
The inspiration sort of builds on itself, that I have a little idea in a technique that I tried, and have it evolve over time. And it could be a little something that I saw, like an amazing pot in a museum, and there was like one really cool idea there that I don't want to knock off the artist or like steal the whole concept, and I'm not looking to copy the pot, but there's one little element in there that's like, wow, that one little element there, I bet I could put my own twist on it, and go into my studio and try something out. And the first attempt might not be successful, but over time it morphs into a whole new series.
Yeah. Side note related to that, I recently read a quote. It was online, so it said Picasso said it. I think maybe Picasso said it, but it said that inspiration will find you, but it has to find you working. And that
Yeah,
kind of resonates to what you just
yeah,
said. And I know that's been my experience too with basically anything I have to make. You gotta really work at it for the wheels to start turning and for inspiration to find you.
yeah.
So that
When
works.
people come to my studio or go to a gallery that I'm in, or a show that I have at Silvermine, and they'll walk into the room and say, what? And it's just, how do you do all that work? And I'm in my studio from 10 in the morning to like 8 or 9 at night, and
Just
break for meals or teaching, but it's
right,
all
just to
play.
do it. Yeah, that's awesome. So, um, can we talk a little bit? And I assume this is the glaze portion of the process. Let's go back to that. Because our collection at Sorel, we have some beautiful pieces, but a lot of them have what you call crystals, and they also have gold luster. So I wanted to just talk a little bit about those. What are the crystals? Because when I first read that, I was like, what kind of crystals? But then I had you sort of explain it a little bit, and it was different. So I would love if you could just break down what the crystals are in your glazes, and then gold luster, when does that get applied?
Sure. Hang on one second. I'm gonna go grab a pot that's 20 feet to my right to show the
Yeah,
crystals.
yeah. That's great. And I'm gonna check this question.
So this is a crystalline bowl that I got out of the kiln a couple months ago. So the crystals are a zinc silicate crystal that grows on the surface of the glaze as the kiln cools down. So if you have just an analogy to kind of get the concept in your head, if you have a hot cup of water and you dissolve salt in that water, when the cup is really hot, the salts will stay in solution in the cup. But then if you leave it in the cup for a couple hours, the liquid will cool down and the salt will precipitate and fall back out of solution onto the bottom of the cup. So the same thing happens with the glaze, that when the glaze is 2,300 degrees, the zinc can stay inside of the glaze. But then as the kiln cools down, the zinc comes to the surface of the pot and it will grow a little dot. I'm not sure if you're going to be able to see like these smaller little dots there.
Yeah, yeah, I can see
So
that.
that's the zinc starting to seed a crystal. And there's a very narrow range in the kiln between like 2,000 degrees and 1,700 degrees that the crystals will start to grow. So they need a very controlled cool down in the kiln. And because normally what happens in a normal glaze firing is the kiln gets to 2,300 degrees and then the kiln just cools really quick. But
Mm-hmm.
this firing, it goes to that range where the crystals start to grow. And then I tell the kiln to stay there for like 6, 7, 8 hours. And that little dot will grow into a crystal. And every time that the temperature changes slightly in the kiln, maybe like 50 to 100 degrees, and then stalled out there, it'll grow into a little, the disc will change and you'll see rings in the crystal. So kind of like rings on a tree. If you
Yeah,
look, if you look closer, I'm not sure if you can see them in this live stream, but
yeah, yeah.
see
No,
how
that's
the
good.
edge is like white and frilly, and
Yeah.
there's a couple bands there. So that's the kiln being adjusted slightly as the kiln cools down and stalled. So you can grow the crystal in an infinite amount of ways depending on the temperatures that you choose to cool the kiln down at. So if you wanted like larger bands on the edge of the crystal, you could tell the kiln to take longer on that amount of time. Um, so it's kind of mix and match. There's a lot of failure because what you are doing, you can't see in the kiln. So you have no idea what's happening. It's all
Right.
based it's all based on experiments that you did in the last kiln.
Oh, okay. If only kilns were made of glass. Bummer. Maybe someday.
Yeah.
Okay, so another process question. You kind of talked about this already, where you said that you have to plan based on what your end result's gonna look like and then work
Yep.
back, or what you'd like to see and then work back. So when you make, I know you said you kind of start with your glaze. So what about the form of the piece itself? Do you ever sketch that out? Do you have any plan for the form in advance, or is it really you're just starting with the glaze and then things sort of work in that direction? How do you find the right combination or balance between the form and the glaze itself and within that process?
Well, the crystalline glazes, using those as an example, I mean, if we just start with, depending on the clay that you choose, you're going to get a hugely different color. So you're picking your color palette based on the clay that you choose. If I chose a brown stoneware, the colors would be a lot more earthy and maybe have specks in them. So the crystalline work, I work in a white stoneware, so it's starting off as like a creamy kind of primer coat underneath the glaze. And for me, for my chemistry, from all my experiments, it grows the best crystals, which isn't necessarily true for all artists. It's just personal to my journey. And crystalline glazes need vertical surfaces for my work, because they're very runny and they'll pool and turn into a really thick layer if it's a horizontal piece. So they really shine on more vertical curves. If you have a nice curve too on like my queen pieces that come to a really narrow neck, you'll get different colors often on the shoulder because that's a more horizontal part of the pot. And then it goes into a more vertical part of the pot, so you get that change. So I'm thinking about those sort of aspects in the color shift, and choose my on how it goes.
You just mentioned your queen pieces, and that's a perfect segue into my next question, which is that at Sorel, our collection, we have a ton of your pieces that are named after, I would say just queens. They're royals because there's a duchess in there and there's a few princes and stuff like that. So where does the royal titling theme come from?
I've always been really drawn to mythology, and I find pottery a really all-encompassing art form where it brings everything that kind of makes me happy together. So I get to think about mythology as I'm creating the piece, and it's a really fun aspect to bring into it. And I feel like they have personalities and they're people, and the gold always gave a really special, really crown element in there, and it spun off, and I get to think along the process about who's with me, whose personality I'm imparting into the piece.
Ah, that's interesting. And to go back to something that I forgot about, that we were going to talk about earlier, was the gold luster. So are you painting that on after?
So that comes as a third firing. So after that glaze firing, where the glaze gets melted onto the pot, then I'll apply the gold luster. So it's gold dissolved in a solvent that gets brushed on top of the glaze, and then goes back into the kiln and gets fired to about 1300 degrees and lets the gold melt on top of the glaze. So it's just not like a paint. It's literally melting the golds onto the glaze.
Gotcha. Oh, that's interesting. So that's the crown at the end.
Yes, that's the crowning. Yes, it's her coronation.
I love it. Okay, pivoting from crowning the sort of, do you call them vessels? I've always called them vessels, but I don't know. Do you ever call them vases, or not? It's more of a vessel than a vase, I guess.
Yeah, I always choose the vase rather than vase. It's, the difference is a couple zeros.
Okay. Okay, so pivoting from that collection of vessels, vases, to we recently got a couple of trees that are lit with they're electrically wired to be lit, and they're really cool. If you haven't seen them yet, I think I posted one in our stories, so it should still be there. And you can also check out all of Jon's art at the link in our bio. But we got these only a couple of weeks ago, so they're really brand new. And they are wired to actually, they've got a little light in this inside, and then there's these little holes in the tree, and you can see the light come out. So what I'm wondering is, did you wire them yourself, and how did you figure out how to, if you did, how did you figure out how to put all that together? Where did the idea come from? Because I think it's beautiful and I love it.
I did the wiring myself. When I was a younger potter, I had a part-time job in a lighting store in Sanford, called the Accessory Store.
Okay.
And I picked up all my wiring prowess there. I made all the chandeliers in my house. I made my lamps. I made my floor lamps. If I can make it, I've made it. So I think I have like 4 chandeliers in the house that I've made out of clay. And
oh, they're out of clay. Wow. Okay.
Yep.
I was thinking maybe you like also picked up metalwork at some point.
No, that's on my agenda though.
All right, well that's really cool. Now, are there any artists who have inspired you or you feel connected to in some way? And that could be like an old master, or that could be someone contemporary. Are there particular, or is there a particular style of, or an art movement historically or something that influences you in any way, or is it just sort of like this is coming out of you and you do you in the studio?
My mentor and person that I admire the most in the clay world is Bruce Dennert, who is head of ceramics at Peters Valley in Layton, New Jersey.
Okay.
Great art school. His mind is amazing. His work is phenomenal. I don't think our work is so similar, but his use of glazes, and I'm inspired, and I feel I think our brains have the similar sort of thought process that we need to not be working on the same thing at the same time.
Yeah.
That I work in collections, and I allow myself the freedom of leaving that collection and going on to something else, but revisiting, coming back months later, and just giving myself the permission to put space between me and the work and get to really live with it and decide what was the most successful and what to continue on in that collection. And that's something that he is like a world master at, that I find very inspiring.
Now, did you go to that school, or is this just you met him and he happens to teach at that school?
Yeah, I've been working with him for over a decade. God, long time, probably since 2005. So I've been taking workshops with him and doing wood firing and soda firing down there. And we've built a kiln at Silvermine together, our soda kiln. And we're about to build another one.
So you mentioned when you were a young potter. So from that time period when you were just starting out, and not from when you were like a kid getting art supplies for Christmas, but when you were sort of more of an established sculptor, from then to now, how has your work changed, if at all?
Well, my throwing skills have vastly improved. The shapes and the concepts over time have become more cohesive, and as a whole more thoughtfully thought of in a cohesive pattern where it all kind of makes sense and looks like it has a personality and a soul. So soul
Right.
is something that I've been thinking about lately, and from questions that I've been getting at show, why do you do this? Why do you do that? Why do you put that twist in the piece? And a lot of it comes to finding soul, and what soul means to an artist is personal and different. And it's finding that soul that I think is the hardest part, but people can really see it in work if
Right.
it has that fire and soul in it.
Yeah. No, I think you're absolutely correct. And what would be a piece of advice that you tell your younger self as an artist, if you could?
Definitely to worry less.
You know, you are
Uh,
not the first person to answer that question that way.
yeah.
That's
I mean,
really funny.
being an artist is really terrifying
Yeah.
because it comes in feast or famine, and when the famine hits, you really self-judge and question if your choice was correct. And society as a whole uh, gives you the message that you maybe being an artist is not the most financially prudent uh, choice to make,
But you've got soul.
but yeah.
We just had someone say to worry less, noted. So that's good. You've imparted that little piece of wisdom on a few people. I think that's a really great thing. In 5 words or less, what is your goal as an artist? If you can do it in 5 words, that's it. You're on the spot. It's okay if you can't. Just aim for 5.
um, Pottery that demands attention. I don't want my pieces to hit you second when you walk into a room. I want them to be a statement and something to behold and noticed when you walk into a room.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that was more than 5 words, but that's fine.
Well, that was the
The
yeah, how
first,
many
the
was
first one
it?
you did it in 4. That's true. You elaborated. You're fair enough. Fair enough. You did it. Okay, we're gonna pivot a little bit away from just talking about art right now, and we're going to get into a couple of this or that. So, coffee or tea?
Coffee. I need the boost of energy to get back into the studio and give me a second wind.
Okay, fair enough. Are you a morning person or a night person? When do you do your best work?
Well, when I was younger, I was definitely a night person, but I've transitioned into a solid afternoon person.
Okay, I actually have to say that I completely agree with you. I think I do my best work. Like, I really focus in the afternoon. Mornings, no.
Yeah.
Cake or pie? Since we just had Thanksgiving, I have to ask cake or pie.
Well, definitely cake. I don't have time for all the fussiness of crusts and baking and then filling and then baking again. I need fast. I need to get back into the studio, and I can't do it with pie.
You're actually probably more of a mug cake person. You can throw
Oh,
it in
there you
the
go.
microwave, cake in 2 minutes or less. So
Yeah,
there was a secret option 3, mug cake.
my husband's a
Um,
better baker.
Books or movies?
I'm a more visual person, so I'm gonna go for the controversial movie person.
I don't think that's controversial. I'm a movie. I'm actually a TV person. I like to just sit down and watch for 8 straight hours. So there's nothing controversial about that here. I don't know if anybody else has any ideas or opinions on that. But true crime or rom-com?
True crime. I have headphones on in a lot of my videos, and when I'm throwing, and people always think that I'm listening to like some sort of energetic music, but it's really like crime podcast.
Okay, note to self. Next time I look at your work,
Yeah.
I'm gonna note that. If you could be any animal, what would it be?
So I grew up like 100 yards from Long Island Sound. Um, so I've always been captivated by the ocean. And I remember one time there was I don't know what kind of whale it was, but it came, they very rarely come into the sound by Stanford, but I remember seeing a whale and being just like completely captivated, just like blown
Yeah.
from seeing a whale. And I feel like I can grasp flight, but diving down into the ocean, just like it's so different from any ideas that I have that just would seem like an amazing feeling.
Yeah. Okay. So a whale. Is there
Yeah.
a, oh, wait. Oh, okay. We have one question. I'm going to pause quickly to ask this question that was just in the comments. Would you suggest experimenting with your art or following a fixed pattern repeatedly?
I guess that's a personality issue with the particular potter. If you find that working with the same thing all the time is not emotionally rewarding and feels like it's firing your passion, that I would say leave one set of work and try a new idea and then circle back. I know a lot of, if you go to art school or you want to be, sometimes people say like a real artist just does one thing and over. And I mean, if I had to do that, it wouldn't be interesting to me. I think I'd spend a lot less time in the studio. And I
Mm.
think I think I would be a lot worse teacher because I wouldn't have that breadth of knowledge. And you would be surprised if you allow yourself to like get a breadth of knowledge and be a little more free to roam, that that thing that you tried that might not be successful with that one thing that you were just at, you can somehow incorporate back into uh, your main focus.
All right. Um, okay, now I'm gonna go back to where we were going with our questions before. If you could travel anywhere in the world tomorrow, where would you go?
So I would probably go to Italy again, to my ancestral birthplace, well, paternally, to the town of Puzzuoli, Italy. I only got to spend like a day there a couple years ago, and it had such a history and awesome ancient past that I was expecting a lot less and blown away by the ruins and the pottery that I saw there. I think it would be really cool to kind of like connect the ancient pots that I found there to somehow incorporate that into work that I could push myself forward with.
Oh, he's buffering a little bit.
Oh,
There
is
you
it
go.
better?
I can see you again.
Okay. Where did I cut
Yeah.
off?
We heard you say that you saw a lot of beautiful pottery there and that it would be interesting to go back, and you were blown away by.
Yeah. And it would be really interesting if I could spend more time there and if they had a particular method that they did with pottery there in ancient times and try to figure out how to incorporate that into new work. I think that would be really interesting.
That's so kind of incredible that you went and there was this sort of like plethora of pottery that you were able to see. Geographically, where is the town in Italy?
So it's next to Mount Vesuvius.
Okay.
So it's next to Pompeii. Pompeii and Pizzoli
Nice.
were, whenever in books, in textbooks, they talk about Pompeii, Pizzoli is, part of that.
Yeah. When I was younger, I went to Pompeii, and when you said what you said about that town with all of the ruins and the pottery, that was what I sort of saw in my mind. It was Pompeii, so that's very cool. Okay, and what do you do in your free time?
Pottery.
Okay.
Oh,
All
yeah.
right, so pottery can be one answer. What you have to pick something outside of pottery.
Oh, okay. All right. Hmm. I, I get sort of passionate with gardening for a short period of the year, and
Oh,
then kind
cool.
of lose steam toward the end of the season.
Me
And
too.
that's
Have you ever made yourself like planters or anything? Oh, we lost you again. Hang on, John. This is our last question. There you
um,
go. I see you good.
I've made all my pots, so there's no store-bought pottery allowed in the house.
That's really cool. That's the perfect way to end. Love it. All right, end scene. Thank you so much, Jon. For anybody who's watching now, you'll be able to catch the whole thing. If you didn't catch the whole thing, I'm going to post it, and we're also going to have a written blog that you can read later this week, early next week, potentially. So thank you, everybody who joined. Thank you, Jon, so much for talking to me today. This has been a lot of fun. A lot of people say they learned a lot. I learned a lot, I know. So have a great holiday season. And for anybody who's interested in seeing Jon's work, you can check it out at the link in our bio. We have some beautiful new, I think they're like a deep red. You've got a couple new ones that are like a really beautiful deep red color. We've got trees that are lit. We've got pumpkin sculptures with all kinds of stuff. So go check that out. Okay?
Thank you very much.
Have a great rest of your day. Thank you. Bye-bye.